special tour related to Chanukah. A little bit about myself, but before that, a very special hello, because I know that they're listening in, is Tommy and Izzy Jacobs, very close and dear friends who are virtually like a mishpucha to us here. And Tommy and Izzy, a special toda rabah for having sponsored this event and allowing the participants to be able to see something different that perhaps they haven't been exposed to on their many trips to Israel. So, who am I? Ich bin Effi Yaacobi, an expat from Australia who's been living here for 46 years since February of 1973. But I was born in Israel. I was born in Israel to mum and dad, to Tzvi and Miriam, who came out on Chalutz Aliyah, Aliyat Noah, back in 1931 to 1934, at the time when this place was still called Palestine. They came out, leaving everybody behind, and those who remained behind, unfortunately, like many others, perished in the Shoah. They set up home, they got married, and I and my sister were born here. My sister is Nava, and she was a teacher at Scopus for over 40 years. So I'm pretty confident that some of the people listening in today are either parents who know Nava from then, or the younger generation who is listening in who would have even been taught by her for so many years in at Scopus itself. She was called Hamorat Navachem. So we were brought up in a very Zionistic pro-Israel home. We only spoke Yiddish or English. Dad said, you want to speak English? You go outside, you talk to the goyim. Here, Hebrew or Yiddish. I went to school when we got to Australia. Dad's brother, Natan, who fled from Poland in 1938, he managed to get out, sponsored us to come out. We came out in 1956. I attended Yeshiva College in Hotham Street. In fact, one of the founding classes that were there and was taught by Rabbi Groner, who, by the way, his son, Sholom Ber, who I believe is a shaliach in South Africa, was one of my classmates for many years. Rabbi Zalman Serebransky at Tzaddik and Rabbi Gurovich and many others as well. I was extremely active in Zionist youth movement activities, and I joined Beitar, became head of Beitar in Victoria, and just before making Aliyah back in 72, I was Rosh Hanaga Artzit, which means I was the head of Beitar in Australia itself. But after that, after Yeshiva, I went to Albert High School, which was 60% Jewish at that time, matriculated in 1967, went to Melbourne Uni, a degree in commerce, and I then joined the National Bank on a 2-year management fast-track program, which was good, except that I encountered anti-Semitism there. After 2 years, I said, Genig, enough, she's nicht for me, it's not for me. I resigned, got my parents' blessings, bought a plane ticket, and within 4 weeks, I was in Eretz Yisrael. February the 5th, 1973. As an Israeli born, I had to serve in the army. There was no doubt in my mind that I was going to. In fact, I volunteered to double my service. I joined in the first induction straight after the Yom Kippur War. November 1973, joined the Golani Infantry Brigade and remained there for 2.5 years. During that time, I knew people up on the north. So after my discharge, I joined a kibbutz called Mevot Hamal on the southern tip of the Golan Heights, an Anglo-Saxon kibbutz from people Habonim Australia, Habonim in London, and the scout movement that was here. I was sent on shlichut during my time on the kibbutz, together with Felicity, my wife, back in 1986 to Sydney to work with the Jewish community in the Habonim youth movement. Came back, couldn't find my place again in kibbutz. We left, we moved to the center of the town to Netanya. I joined the Wingate Institute, where I stayed there at the National Sport Institute as the director for overseas relations for 20 years till I retired. So guys, Effi is a pensioner. Effi doesn't have to work. Effi does what Effi wants to do. But I couldn't sit at home and watch the telly. No way, or drink cups of coffee. My mates automatically said, Effi, go and do the tourist ministry tour guide course. It's set for you. So I did. I joined 2-year full-on academic course, passed my exam, received my license, and have been guiding ever since. And I don't guide for guilt. Don't get me wrong. I get paid, but I'm not doing it for money. It's not a job. It's not a career. It's a shlichut. It's a mission for me to enthuse my guests with what we have here in Eretz Yisrael. Before we move on to the next thing, I just wanted to make sure we get our priorities right, guys, because I am a die-hard Collingwood supporter, right, since 1957. So if we've got some Melbourne fans out there, or Richmond fans, or a Carlton fan, we've got Goise Tsuris, guys. We've got big problems here. But enough on that.
You're offending a lot of people.
Shumdavar. They have to turn and become Magpie supporters. That's it. 221 is our
I'm
year.
a Magpie supporter, so you made me feel good.
Okay, that's it. That's the way it should be. Chazak ve'amatz. Guys, we're standing here in front of a shellet called Hasmonean, the Hasmonean village, which I only knew, by the way, a couple of months ago that I fell into it and knew that it existed. It was founded in 1979 by two special people, Zohar and Naomi Baram. Moshav Shilata we're in Hevel Modiin, which is the regional council of Modiin, where all the Chanukah story will unfold right here. So I interviewed Zohar a couple of days ago, and I'd like to put a short clip on to give kavod to this man who put together what we're about to see with his own hands. Unbelievable work, and he deserves the credit. And I asked him the one question: Zohar, why did you do it? What prompted you to build this village? Shimshon, please play the clip. Guys, we have a special person here. The founder, the initiator of this awesome recreation of the Hasmonean.
רואים את הקליפ. ואיפה אנחנו ממשיכים בינתיים?
And I would like to introduce him to tell us just in a few minutes. Zohar, we're talking to Chabad movement.
You hear it?
It's 8 o'clock their time. Beautiful day today, 11 o'clock our time in Eretz HaKodesh. Tell me, Zohar, what made you put together this awesome village? Why did you do it?
First of all, good morning. Now we are in the morning in
זה שאני לא אראה את התחת שלך, הוא מאוד מלוכלך.
Your question, why did I actually create this kind of project? It belongs to our Jewish and Israeli past. I was a very high ranking in the government, and then I quitted. And after about less than 4 years, I, with my beloved woman, unfortunately passed away from a disease, and my children, we began here the project, which is called the Hasmonean village, to show that the Jews are not in Israel, are not only a bunch of group that, as he said, coming from Europe, refugees, or from the Middle East countries, the Muslim, but our roots are very, very far, and therefore it's called the Hasmonean village. And what you may see here, I'm sure that you'll see it, is the construction of houses inside, outside, vegetation, high, like trees, some of them giving fruits, Shivat Aminim, the 7 species, herbs like you see here, synagogue. All this together are giving the impression of how the Jewish entity in the villages existed.
Fantastic.
That's the idea, and here you have the result.
Zohar, thank you.
Have a good day.
That's it for sure, 100%. We will enjoy our
Have a good
tour.
day.
We are entering and going back into time and letting you see history. Are you hearing me, guys? Is that okay? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you.
no worry. All right. Right, so we're about to walk into the village and we're about to let's see history unfold before your eyes, because this is where it all happened. And the next best thing to do, other than walking the sites themselves when you come here at a normal time, is to do it by Zoom and at least let you see what we have here. And the only way to guide in the Holy Land is using this book, the Tanakh, because here it lays it out with the scriptures one-to-one. And when I guide many groups, Jewish and non-Jewish, and believe me, when the Christian groups come out and they take the Tanakh and they visualize the sites one-to-one where these miracles and awesome events occurred, they don't know where to put themselves. So let's start going in. And the first thing we begin to see is the Etz Haruv, the carob tree, which you must know because of the story certainly of Shimon Bar Yochai, the disciple of Rabbi Akiva, who after the Bar Kokhba revolt still resisted the Romans and of course went into hiding in a cave at Meron, and for 13 years, together with his son Elazar, existed and hid in that cave. And how did they survive? First of all, there was a spring nearby, but miraculously, outside of the cave sprang an Etz Charuv, and that allowed them to survive by eating this nutty flavor, edible fruit that is used by kindergarten teachers, because when you rattle it, you hear the seeds and it becomes a musical instrument for the kiddies, just like the Tof Miriam's tambourine. Let's continue on as Avi moves forward. And the first thing we're going to encounter is this. This construction that you're seeing in front of you is called a sarcophagus. A sarcophagus is a stone coffin, beautifully decorated. Obviously, the best ones to see, you have to go to the Israel Museum. They are absolutely stunning. Or at Beit Sharim, next to Tzipori, the necropolis of the Galil, where you find hundreds of these. But what was the idea behind it? The word sarcophagus comes from the Greek language, and it means a flesh eater. So you put your inside the stone coffin, you cover it with a stone lid, you go away, you come back in 12 months, you lift the lid, the skin and flesh have decomposed, you pick up the bones, and you put them in a casket that's made either of ceramics or wood or iron, whatever they had with the materials at that time, beautifully carved, sometimes with the name of the deceased, and you took that and you put it somewhere to revere. Then you continue to use this in what's known in archaeology as secondary use. Well, guys, you spent a lot of geld putting this together. You're not going to just leave it empty. So you put the next member in, you close it up, and so it repeats itself, a respectful way to do it. Just as we walk past, have a look as Avi, this is a panoramic shot of Modiin, the city of Modiin, and the surrounding hills. This is where it all took place. This is where the rebellion began, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's move forward as we enter into the village. Avi will photograph. We walk up the slope. Okay, so we're entering into what's known as the visitor center, and we're going to sit down and put it all into perspective for you. But before we do, allow me just to light, just to let you go into the atmosphere preceding Chanukah. I'll get back to the, mishvitz here. It's very hot, so I allow myself to take my magpie scarf off and put it to one side. Right, so the first thing we do when we're sitting here is to put things in a context, because without a historical context, without some sort of reference point, a timeline, it's difficult to visualize and understand what we're about to see and do. But sitting here with all the artifacts that you see in front of you, that we'll talk about them in a moment, and the backdrop simply is historical prima facie evidence that we were here and this is part of our land, 100%. And the first thing we do when you do that is in a timeline. So we're talking about the Second Temple period. We're talking about 1200 BC to the destruction of the First Temple, 586 BCE. During that time, establishing the monarchy, going through from King Saul, King David, Solomon, Rehoboam, and the rest of the kings until Zedekiah. And then the Assyrians decided to rock up in 586 BCE, destroy the temple. The Babylonian exile, taking thousands of Jews to Babylon. But 50 years later, the return from exile, rebuilding the temple. But at that time, the country was still under Babylonian and then Persian rule. And by the way, it was the Persians who introduced minted coins into the area. After the Persians, they decided that it was the turn of the Greeks. The Hellenistic Empire decided to turn up here, take over the land. During their time, we talk about the Hasmonean, we'll get to them in a minute. After them came the Romans. They said, we are expanding our empire. They kicked the Greeks out. established their rule, King Herod and his reign. And that went on for something like 250 years until the demise of the Roman Empire and the rise of Christianity, the Byzantine Empire that ruled here till the 7th century, a period of over 300 years. Then the early Muslims turned up and they ruled for 400 years. But then the Crusaders turned up and said, now it's our turn. We've got to kick the Muslims out and take care of all the holy places important to Christianity. So they turned up in 1099 and ruled for 192 years in what's known as the First and Second Kingdom of Jerusalem, except for 4 years. 1187, Salah ad-Din, the Persian general, rocks up and decides, I'm kicking the Crusaders out, which he did. But 4 years later, Richard the Lionheart comes back, establishes a stalemate after fighting with Salah ad-Din. He got Akko Richard. The Muslims still had Jerusalem, but allowed access to the Christianity. But then another person decided to come on track here, the Mamelukes, the mighty empire from Egypt. And they turned up, kicked the Crusaders finally out and established themselves here for over 200 years. But then, of course, the Ottomans said, now it's our turn. Came here in 1517, kicked out the Mamelukes and ruled for 400 years till their demise at the end of World War I in 1917. The British took over and established a mandate for 31 years till 1948 when the Yidden took over and we established our state. Guys, you just got world history in 4.5 minutes flat. So what does that do? But throughout all that time, from the first and second temple period, an unbroken line of Jewish presence was here. We don't need any more proof to tell us that this country with a covenant with Abraham belongs to us. We don't have to justify it to anybody else. But historical evidence is what you need sometimes to prove that we were here. And what better way than to do it right here in front of you? Have a look. First of all, the coins. You can't fake a coin. I'll allow Avi to come in as much as he can and see what he can get. Now, it's hard to see, but this is a Hasmonean coin from John Hyrcanus I, the priest, the son of Simon. But have a look here, you'll be able to virtually see it on the placard. And it's both sides. One side has it in Paleo-Semitic Hebrew, that's to say ancient Hebrew. And it's written here, Yochanan the high priest and the council of John Hyrcanus, Yochanan, council of the Jews in Hebrew. On the other side, you've got this wreath and the two what's called shofarim concupea, which is a symbol in abundance of plenty. Here you have it in far more greater resolution. Guys, history in front of your eyes, Hebrew lettering, saying what we just read. Another one for you to see as well at the same time. Now, these coins were minted, and when you touch it, this is an extremely humbling experience because you're touching. Now, I'm not saying that John Hyrcanus minted this coin. He didn't, but he obviously gave it to a Jewish craftsman to do. But at the same time, to be able to touch something, to know that your Jewish forefathers, our Jewish forefathers, minted this coin to prove it. And when you find these coins all over the place, including the Aegean Basin, it proves we're here. The other thing is the ceramic lamps. Now here you have original ceramic lamps, but loaned to me by Zohar, dated to the Second Temple period. So we're looking at the Hasmonean era in the 2nd century BCE. And have a look at this one. And then have a look at that one, exactly the same. Now you'll find these all over. Now they've been carbon-14 tasted. And when you find them in Greece to the same date, then you know the influence of Hellenistic art amongst the Jewish craftsmen who put this together. Another symbol of what we have here to tell us that we were here. But in Chanukah, we have customs and we have traditions, the story of the Hasmonean. And what better way to do it than to start with this, guys? Ponchkas, sufganiyot, donuts, absolutely stunning by this firm, Roladin. Now, guys, I don't get a commission from this, so don't worry, right? But this is the best conditor that you have, and you have an endless number of choices of donuts that you have here. And have a look. You've got them with caramel, you've got them with wild berries, you've got it with Oreo, and you've got it with my favorite, you've got it with passion fruit. So we're going to pretend we're on My Kitchen Rules and have a look at this, guys. We're going to cut it open, turn it around, and just the same way that Peter Evans and Manu Fidel talk to us over the screen and say, have a look at this example. Look at the moisture. Look at the product. Look at the color. Smell it. You can't, but I can. This is the real thing. But my kitchen rules, eat your heart out. And you know why? Because these are holy sufganiyot, holy ones. You can't get that in Hotham Street. You can't get that in Glen Ira Road. You can only get them here in Dinat Yisrael. And it's kosher to boot, the best conditura in town. Now, the word sufganiyah comes from the Greek word sufan, meaning sponge. And what a way to have one of the treats which is fried, because the festival itself is surrounded by the miracle of the oil. So you have it the same with the latkes. The other things that we have as part of our traditions, and that is the dreidel, that you also know. The dreidel was a game that was invented in order to allow Jews to study in secret the Hebrew language and the Torah. And of course, it has the 4 letters, Ken, Nun, Gimel, Hey, and Pei, which is here in Israel. You guys will have Nes Gadol Haya Sham, because you're looking at us here. We have it, Nes Gadol Haya Po, B'mdinat Yisrael. But there is also the traditional menorah, the Chanukiyot that we have. The 8-branched menorah as opposed to the 7-branched golden menorah in the temple. And here you have just an example of Urdu sleep, because there's always a question, how do you light it? What is the correct manner? And there is a correct manner, because there was what is known as a pilpul, a deep analysis, a scholarly debate between the houses of Shammai and the houses of Hillel. And Jewish law adopted the house of Hillel that said that you begin from the right and you use the central candle, the shamash, or the servant candle at a higher position to light the Chanukah, and the next night as well. But you light it then from left to right. And the reason from left to right is that your hand does not create a shadow over the lights of the Chanukah. So this one, by the way, Chanukah, is made by my son, Lior, who is a scrap metal artist. So he put together his version of a kosher Chanukah. And if we just have a look quickly over here and move across, just to let you see some of the examples of the Chanukiyot that we have here that Zohar has, that he's managed to collect over the ages. Hungry, magnificent, made by 2 brothers who were survivors from the Holocaust. You can see this would have held the shemen, and this is the little cud that comes out, and you pour the oil into the little cups. These ones are from Chaleb, the Jewish community. Now, it doesn't look like something like a Chanukah for a reason, because they weren't allowed to practice their religion. So they had to create a lamp, an 8-branched lamp, which you can see this is where the oil would have been, and light it from Syria over 150 years ago. This is the shamash that you have here. Going through here, you have a look from Morocco, beautifully aligned. Bezalel, the Art Academy, 1910. This one is from Portugal. And Portugal, look at what we have here. Yehudit, and the famous story against the Greek Hophaneris, where she cut him up. So you've even got all the things that you need to do in terms of the historical timeline. From Poland, the eagle, the national emblem of Poland that you have. And the others continue on. Even another one from Bezalel that shows Judah Maccabee cleaning the temple and dismantling the altar. We'll talk about that later on. And the Russian one with lions, the lions, the symbol of Judah that you have always, and they decided to do all the little spouts. Absolutely stunning Chanukah with the 2 lines of Judah. And of course, wherever you see the 2 amudim, the 2 columns, like you have in this German one, obviously that reflects the 2 columns at the temple of Boaz and Yachim. So we go back to our table and we talk about what happened here. When we look at the artifacts around here, have a look over this one. This particular one here, also proof. This is called a morag, a threshing sledge, which meant you use that in order to crush the husks of the wheat. And here you have it right in front of you, a picture taken or a print that shows you how they would use the morag to do it. And you don't have to go further. As I said, everything is in the Bible. You just got to look up Isaiah 28. And let me quote what's written here. Caraway is not threshed with a sledge, nor is the wheel of a cart rolled over cumin. Caraway is beaten out with a rod, and cumin with a stick. Grain must be ground to make bread, so one does not go on threshing it forever. The wheels of a threshing cart, the morag, may be rolled over it, but one does not use horses to grind grain. It says it all here. You don't have to go any further to be able to try and understand the implements here that are all original. But we go to the story of Chanukah. And the story of Chanukah, we have to begin with the Second Temple period, with the exile of the Jews to Babylon, and then coming back under what's known as the Cyrus Koresh Xerxes Declaration that you have right here, written in the Akkadian language, where it specifically says, amongst many other things, that the Jews can return to their homeland, rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and rebuild their temple. And if you want to find that, where do you go? The British Museum, room 52, in the Irvani Gallery. You can see it for yourself and read the translation where it actually says it. So the Jews came back. When the Jews came back, where did they settle once they were released? Jerusalem. And why Jerusalem? Because of the abundance of water. But they then moved out to the plains of Lud and Ramla in this area here that we're going to walk by in a second. And they established villages. In fact, they established thousands of villages. And how do I know that number? Because after the Bar Kokhba revolt, Hadrian, and it's written and recorded in their historical records, destroyed over 1,500 Jewish Judean villages. So we know that there were so many. And where did they come to after that? Around this area of Modiin, and established their rule in the 2nd century BCE. Now things were okay. The Greeks turned up though, and things under Antiochus III were relatively quiet, but there was tension within the Jewish society. Things got worse when his successor, Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, turns up and decides that he's going to teach the Jews a lesson. And in his idea of Hellenization, he was going to squash and remove any Jewish identity or connection to the Torah. So anyone caught with the Torah was executed. The laws forbade circumcision, kosher food, Shabbat. Anything associated with Judaism was repressed. So people had to do it in secret. So they understood that there was a problem here because there were rebels who weren't adhering to the rules. And here you have, by the way, a picture of Antiochus IV. Now, this guy was a bad guy. This was a shtick nevelah, really a bad, bad person. And he ruled with an iron hand. But a revolt occurred. And the revolt occurred once the temple was converted to the temple of the god Zeus back in 167. Now, that was too much. And all of a sudden, there was a rebellion against it. And for that, we move to our next spot. I'll just take these with me. And we get up easily. And just let me collect my things. Let's move to the next spot where we meet the chief rebel. And here we have Matityahu, a Greek officer here on the left, was sent to hunt out these rebels who weren't adhering to the rules of the Greeks. And he turns up to Modiin because they told him that's where it is. He didn't know where Modiin was, so he hired a tour guide. And he took him, and they met him outside the synagogue. And they told him, you have to sacrifice a pig in your synagogue. Now, Matityahu wasn't about to listen to such a decree and said no. Now, this obviously was not what the Greek officer wanted to hear. So he spoke to the Greek officer, and this is what he said as recorded in the books of the Maccabees 1. And he said, even if all the nations that live under the rule of a king obey him and have chosen to obey his commandments, every one of them abandoning the religion of their ancestors, I and my sons and my brothers will continue to live by the covenant of our ancestors. Far be it from us to desert the law and the ordinances. We will not obey the king's words by turning aside from our religion to the right hand or to the left. Well, a fight ensued. In the fight, Matityahu ben Yochanan, the priest, kills the Greek officer and one of his tormentors, a Jewish person who was in the crowd who was siding with the Greeks. Matityahu knew he had no choice. He had to flee. And where did he flee? Where did he flee? To the hills of Gofna, 15 kilometers from here, northeast, just down the road. And he took his sons with him, and they took their herds. Because as Kohanim, They weren't allowed to own land, but they could own herds, cattle or sheep, in order to earn an income. How do we know that they were associated with herds? For that, let's go meet the family. Go out. Come across here, we meet the 5 sons of Matityahu. The first one we meet is Elazar. Elazar, his nickname, Choran. Choran in Aramaic and in Paleo-Semitic Hebrew means the shepherd. The next one is Shimon. And Shimon was called, his name was Tarsi. Tarsi is a weaver. The next one, through the trees, is Jonathan. Jonathan, his nickname was Hapush. Now, we don't quite know the meaning of the word Hapush, so we'll ignore that and move on to the next one, which is Yehuda. Yehuda's name was a Maccabi. A Maccabi means a hammer, a strong hammer, coming from the Hebrew word makevet. A more common use of the word is patish. But Yehuda is also known as Ishchayel, a hero. Now we have 3 other heroes who are mentioned in the Tanakh. Moshe Rabbeinu, Hamelech David, King David, and Hamelech Shaul, King Saul. The 2 of them, Moshe, Moses, and David, were shepherds. Some connection? Who knows? Maybe there was in terms of the name. And the last one is Yochanan, whose nickname is Gardi. And Gardi is a person who works with sheep products. And it comes from the Hebrew word legared, to scrape. He was a tanner. So 4 of the 5 sons were associated with sheep and herding. And what does that mean? It means that they had a great advantage over the Greeks, because in taking out their flocks, they always knew where to look for pasture, for water, and of course, places for rest. So they knew these areas intimately. Big advantage over the Greeks, who were good soldiers, but didn't know the terrain, and it allowed these people to plan and execute their campaigns properly. So let's go see and talk about the battle of the Hasmonean dynasty themselves. You come here and you have a look at the elephant, central feature of one of the battles. So I'll ask Avi to go into the map first, and you'll have a look. It's numbered, and these, each one is a station. So if you look at station number 1, this is Malay Levona, a steep rise between Shechem and Bet El, which is number 2, which was his command center. Here, Judah Maccabee defeated Apollonius, the Sumerian commander. 3, Mount Baal Chatzor, that you have here. This is a mountain east of Bet El. This is where Judah Maccabee was actually defeated for the 2nd time. His forces were routed and he fell in battle down the road. 4, the Givon Valley, a valley north of Yerushalayim. This is where Judah Maccabee defeated Nicanor. 5 is the Temple Mount, the cleansing. We'll get to that in a minute. 6, Beit Zachariah. Beit Zachariah near the town of Elazar. And here you can have a look at this thing. This is where Judah Maccabee suffered his first defeat, and his brother Elazar fell battling the elephants. Now, this was a common war beast. Now, the Greeks used to prime the elephants with wine prior to a battle to provoke them and to put their spirits up, no pun intended. But Eliezer, you can see him here with a spear or the sword stabbing the elephant, who unfortunately fell on top of him, killing him, but he showed resourcefulness and he showed what heroism could be and led his men from the front. A great picture on the Battle of Beit Zachariah. 7, back to the map, is Beit Sur that you have. Beit Sur, a Jewish town north of Hebron. From here, the defeated army of Lysaeus retreated back to Syria. 8, a massive battle in the Ayalon Valley, stretching to the west of the Jerusalem hills. Here, Judah Maccabee defeated Georgia's large army. If you recall the story, he lit his own camp, Judah, with torches, fooling Georgius into believing that he was going to attack this camp unnoticed. Well, he came there was no one there because Judah had outflanked him, and then moved down back to Georgia's base camp, destroying the camp, capturing the equipment. And when Georgius came back, attacked him, he suffered heavy casualties, and he fell back to his own another base. Modiin, of course, number 10, is the center of the rebellion itself, and away it went until the last battles after Judah fell, and we got to two sons that were left, Shimon and Yonatan, who continued the struggle until 152. Yonatan died, and then at 152, a massive battle against Bachidus, in which they came to an agreement that Bachidus understood that he had no business fighting these Michigan Yidden, and they retreated, allowing, in essence, from that date on, to establish what is known as the Hasmonean dynasty, a legitimate monarchy, usurping it by themselves, but a legitimate monarchy. But the definitive date was 164 BCE, where Judah took Yerushalayim, cleansed the temple, and found that little cruise of oil that lasted not one day, but 8 days, and set aside the story of the miracle of the oil lamp. Let's go for a tour of the site and see what we have here as we begin to walk along, to allow you to see the recreation of this village. You can see the type of transport trying to be recreated, the wagons, in exactly the same way as they were, with wooden wheels that did the job admirably. On the other side, you see, these are all original, by the way, a stone that has a slit on one side and it has a slit on the other side. And you'll be able to see, anyone has a guess as to what this could be? Anyone want to unmute for a second and tell me, what is it? No takers? Doesn't matter, I'll tell you anyway as we walk through, but you'll see them all over the place. Two slits on a rock. And of course, as you look at the panoramic view, you see the hills leading out east, that way, straight away east, where the battle stood. Area of 60 on 20, the same size as the Golan Heights. 1,200 square k's is where the Hashmonaim fought all their battles against the Seleucid Greeks until defeating them. Let's move in. This village allows you to see how productive it was, because the villages were small. A Judean village at the time was only 25 to 30 houses with a population between 200 to 300 people, and they dotted the area. But one of the main sources of income was a bet bud, an olive press. And here you can see a working olive press. But when you come with the kiddies, they can work on it and they dress in period costume. But you've got the wooden beam and you've got the stone that turns as the first stage of crushing the actual olives themselves, and then a split on the other side to take them all out. The stone, original. Now at Zohar, at this village, has put together probably, and I'm sure it is, the largest concentration of oil presses that there are in the country. He has 7 of them. No other site can claim 7 in one state. So we move out and we continue on. We come to here. Now you'll be able to understand the slits in the rock as we move forward. So here you can see another olive press, original wheel, the pole, and of course the pole were driven by oxen or mules, right? Crushing the first stage. Once you crush the olives, you then brought them to this stage where you place them in a series of baskets and with a pole that has a fulcrum at the end, so it can only go up to a certain amount, certain height, and then you use the weight, the stone weight, original, to lower it down the amount of stones that you put on. The greater the weight, you crushed the actual, you squeezed. One crushed and this one took the actual oil out and then slid it out to a vat, and you took that. And obviously the first oil would go to the high priests in the temple, what's called virgin oil. Now, we talk about that stone with the two slits. There it is. Here you can see a type of oil press that is a corkscrew. Now, this is modern because it's got iron poles, but the screw. But in the old days, they did it out of wood. You had a wooden screw that did exactly the same job. Hence, those stones were the original corkscrew stones to crush the olives. Let's go down. Move to the next one. By the way, you'll see later on too, with kids, you can spend, 2 hours here to see it all. Because there are so many activities for you to allow them to be occupied. As we saw inside the visitor center with Isaiah and the sledging set, and you saw the people with the pitchforks, the same here. You would lift and raise the wheat for the husks to be blown away after the sledging cart was on it. And then you would use the sieves to be able to get rid of the rest and be left with the kernels of the wheat that would be crushed afterwards into making flour. The mode of transport. Here, look, typical way in the old days of how to draw water. You simply put rope on it, one way, lower the bucket, the other way, raise the bucket to be able to have water for your dwellings. The plants that are here, this is basilicum, basil. Whoa, a lot of hornets here, so we're going to move away. No getting anywhere near the bees, that's for sure. And the other one, sage, magnificent in salad, guys. Well recommended. We are going to show you how they lived here in a typical Second Temple period dwelling. So this is it. This is the way it was reconstructed. This is the way that they lived. And of course, have a look at the inscription in Hebrew. Dor olech v'dor ba v'haaretz le'olam omedet. A generation comes and a generation goes, but the land, the country, Eretz Yisrael will always be here. Let's enter the dwelling itself and be greeted by one of the Maccabean family to have an afternoon tea. And this is completely reconstructed, but this is exactly what they would have had. Chairs, tables, all made out of wood. As you continue to turn around, you can see weaving, a major local cottage industry that you had. The loom for taking the strands off the sheep's wool to be able to provide you with the netted threads that you need. And even here, guys, this is a broom, a palm tree, but it was used, exactly, they didn't have broom, they didn't go to Bunnies and buy a broom, so you've got it right here. Use what nature gives you. It's exactly the point of these dwellings itself. But this get the roof, thatched roof, wooden beams, this is the way it happened. Whoa, guys, look what I found. Straight ahead. What's this? Outdoor dunny. Now, guys, I know you guys are proud Australians, and we talk about the outdoor dunny, but we predated you with outdoor plumbing by well over 2,000 years, as you can see. So this is our outdoor dunny. Keep it in mind. Not everything was produced in Australia. Right, as we walk past, you can see we're stoves for making pitot. Typical, I'm sure you've seen it before.
Bread.
And the forge that you would have. By the way, the forge, Tommy, that's for you, because I know your family background with your dad as a blacksmith. He would have loved this for sure. Have a look at the old implements that you have here. The anvil, a shtick patish. This is a makevet, guys. This is heavy stuff, but forged right here as well, allowing the people to see what was here as well. Let's move on. It shows you as well another local industry, which would have been ceramics. There was no lack of clay that you could use. Now, obviously, these are reconstructed, but in those days, the wheels were foot pedal, right? You spun the lower wheel The top wheel spins on a central rod, and you shape the clay. So this is just to give you an idea as well. Another one of the, have a look at this magnificent press, with 1, 2, 3, 4 stone weights, all original, all acquired by Zara over many years. You can see how it would have been the fulcrum lower, the baskets would have been here full of olives and the oil squeezed out. Let's continue. And we get to one of the highlights. We get to the Bet Knesset. The Bet Knesset was always the central feature in a Jewish village, either at the highest point or at the center of the village. Now, a Bet Knesset is not something that you build overnight. It takes a long time and you need donors. But what we're seeing here is two things. First of all, a reconstructed Bet Knesset. And this was the Bet Knesset that was pre-70 AD. And why are we talking about that? Because a Bet Knesset prior to 70 AD was exactly what the word meant. Bet Knesset, lehikanes, a house of assembly. So you came to the Bet Knesset in those days to discuss civil matters or to learn and study the texts and read the Torah. But what you didn't do was that you didn't offer sacrifices, you didn't worship, and you didn't pray. Because for that you had the temple, which is 30 k's down the road in Yerushalayim. So whenever they find a Bet Knesset, and we have found over 10, post 70 AD, Batei Knesset, there are hundreds. Prior to that, rare, but we found at least 10. Gamla, Modiin, Masada, Chirbat Etri, Vadi Kelt, Magdale, Herodion, Chirbat Etri, at least 10. Now that is awesome, because each one of those Batei Knesset is a Torah in its own right. But all the Batei Knesset in those days, in the Second Temple period, were built in the same manner, as a rectangle. So what you can see here inside is the columns that are original. The rest are reconstructed. But you can see it's a rectangle, which means people sat around the sides. Guys, not like Chabad, Glen Ira, where you're sitting in pews, one behind the other, but in the rectangular side, just like a Sephardic shul. Yerona Kodesh at the other end. And remember, people turn and they say immediately, Effi, it's not facing where? East, to Yerushalayim. Nachon, because pre-70 AD, all of them faced where they faced. They did not necessarily face Yerushalayim, because you went to the temple to worship and pray and offer sacrifices. Post-70 AD, every Bet Knesset, wherever you are, facing east. But if this isn't the highlight, this is. Why did they build them a rectangle and not a square, which would have been easier? Because we get to what is known as the golden ratio. This Bet Knesset is 7.5 meters on 12, which means if you divide 12 by 7.5, you get 1.6. That 1.6 ratio was figured out by Greek mathematicians a long time ago, and it was a integral element of Greek architecture, which, if nothing else, is absolutely stunning, aesthetic, and in the direct proportion. And that's exactly what this stands for, this golden ratio, where you have a direct relationship, a pleasing relationship between the width, the length, and the height of the structure, giving you a perfect proportion structure that represents harmony, function, and stunning aesthetics. That is why they were not built as a square, and they were built as a rectangle. But have a look at this lintel. This lintel is original, and it belonged to the Second Temple period and would have adorned the Bet Knesset. And that is awesome to be able to say that you managed to acquire one. And have a look at what we have here. You have here the Tamar, right, the date, and that was a symbol of Judea. And it was a symbol also of abundance and plenty, because wherever there was an Etz Tamar, there was water. So it means you would have gotten access to water. You had an instant meal with the figs, with the dates, and you had shade. And it's also on our coins, both ancient and new. And let me just show you, guys, the 10 shekel coin. you can see the Etz Tamar. All right, so we always use the symbols even today. The next one is two triangles. In the Greek, this is delta, which means a daled. So if you have a daled at the bottom and a daled at the top, what are you missing? A vav, which would have signaled David, connection to King David. Gaves, maybe, maybe not. But if I was to superimpose this triangle onto the bottom triangle, what would I get? Anyone willing to unmute and say anything? What would it be? Any guesses? Doesn't matter if you don't know. I'll tell you. If you superimpose the top triangle onto the bottom triangle, you get a Magen David. Now, Magen David is not a Hebrew symbol, not a Jewish symbol. It was around in cult societies for many years. But it was the inspiration for the future emblem or symbol on the flag of Israel, and that was chosen back in the late 19th century. So you don't see it anywhere else. I haven't seen it in any Frisian capital and any other Bet Knesset, only the one that Zohar managed to get. The next one is a round circle for the planet Earth, for unity, right, and completeness. The next one is the rectangle that we spoke about, the golden ratio, the pleasing relationship, and why it was used. And the last one as well, the Tamar again. So that is an absolutely stunning position.
Low power mode.
Huh?
Low battery.
Whoa. We got a big tzuras here. זה עדיין צריך לעבוד. We're running out of power mode. Oy vey. So we'll go quickly and just show you the last thing because we're almost at the end. The mikveh, always associated with a Bet Knesset because you have to purify yourself before you went in. Reconstructed, the steps going down. It would have always held natural water runoff from the rains, and it would have to have held 40 se'ah. A se'ah is 9 liters, so 360 liters of water, at least, that had to be in every mikveh that you would find associated with every Bet Knesset. See you. Go back, find another visitor center. Allow many activities for the kids, for painting, for weaving, ceramics. We go back to the back. So, guys, outside the Jewish dwelling, as that's the Chanukah for a minute, and we get to a summary. I always get excited when I come here because it's something that's really special. But looking back at what we just did and saw and learned, I always tell my guests on my Chanukah tour that I think the miracle of Chanukah is still valid today. Now, what do I mean by that? We learned in our tour today of the persecution of our people throughout the millennium. At every stage of our independence in the biblical Eretz Yisrael, empires came and tried to subjugate us to their way of living, culture, and religion. We resisted each time, and they failed. Even during the Babylonian exile, we didn't lose our faith. We returned, and then the Greeks tried their bit, and against all odds, we defeated them and cleansed the temple and found a Noah land that by all reasoning, logic, and understanding should have lasted for 1 day, but in fact lasted 8 days. That was a miracle. But that doesn't end there, as it's happening today. How come? Because even after the exile of the Jews after the Roman era and the Byzantine era, there was always a yearning to return in our prayers each day, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. And then it happened, our return to the land of Zion. From the 18th century onward, we came back to where our kings, Saul, David, Solomon, Rehoboam, the judges, the prophets, the dynasties, they all ruled. And why? In order to establish a foothold, to till the soil and rebuild our ancient homeland. Then surviving and rising from the ashes of the Shoah, the illegal immigration, and against all odds, on May the 14th, declaring the state, independence. And on May the 15th, on the Shabbos the next day, all hell breaks loose. The War of Independence began with 5 mighty Arab armies attacking us, and the war, according to their plan, should have lasted no more than 48, 72 hours max, given the armed strength that they had. But we found the strength to overcome this challenge. We found our cruise of oil that has lasted not 1 day, not 8 days, but 72 years of achievements against all odds. That is our modern story of Chanukah. And if that is not a miracle by Hashem, I don't know what is. So, Chaverim, Toda Rabah. I hope you enjoyed the tour. Please unmute. נראה מה הם יגידו, ידברו. אוקיי?
Very good, guys.
Brilliant.
אוקיי?
That was unbelievable. That was.
Thank you so much.
Anybody
an
has
absolute
any
pleasure.
questions for Effie?
Yeah, listen.
Thank you, Effie. Susie Rose sends love.
Okay, I hope everybody enjoyed it. Guys, we're waiting for you here when all this is over. You come out, and I'll take you guys on tours to hidden gems in Israel that not many people have been to other than the normal regular tours. It'll be my honor and privilege to take you guys from Chabad. All the very best, guys.
Thank you so much.
Hag Sameach, Effi.
Hag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Chag Sameach, of course.
Yasher Koyach. Yasher Koyach.
Okay. Asher, thanks. The same to you guys. All the best. Take care of yourself. Stay safe.
Effie, it's Eva. Thank you very much.
Eva, come on.
And love to Felicity and love to the kids. And I really
For
miss you
sure.
guys. Hope to see you soon.
No
Mwah, it was
worries.
great.
And tune into
where are
Shabbat
you?
Shalom regularly. Effi's a regular on Shabbat Shalom.
Yes.
Hi, thanks
Typical
very much.
client has to get his plug in.
Is Tommy and Izzy
Hi,
there?
we're
Tommy
Effie.
and Izzy, are
Yes,
you there?
we're-
Tommy?
We're here.
Okay, no worries.
Izzy and Tommy, call a kavod that you got Effie for us, okay? Thank you very
Kavod.
much.
Thank you, Effie. Effie, thank you from
All
Susie
the-
Rose.
Tודה רבה, Chag Sameach, guys. All the best.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Koyach.
To leave the meeting? Leave?